Hi, everybody. Saralise here, and I wanted to share today about recognizing the signs of narcissism in ourselves and in others. So it's Live365. Oh my gosh, what day is it? I don't even know what day it is. Day 12. I can't change that now. Okay, that's fine. Hi, Charlie. So good to see you, dude. All right, so recognizing the signs of narcissism within ourselves, I think, is one of the most important healing aspects of reality that we can come into contact with. Because when we see the signs of narcissism within, I mean, we can obviously recognize them in other people now. They're becoming more and more obvious. The veil is being lifted. And so we're starting to recognize patterns of behavior with people, that are being identified now as narcissistic. However, in ourselves, it's a little bit more challenging for us to look at ourselves in that way, because a lot of times our society breeds us to be in our victim consciousness, and that something is happening to us rather than us taking full responsibility for our own behavior and for what's really going on. So I want to talk about how we take responsibility for our own narcissistic qualities, our narcissistic attitudes, our narcissistic behaviors, and how this affects people around us in our environment and ourselves. When we have these narcissistic behaviors running through us and working through us, what ends up happening is we hurt other people, number one, and number two, it's like we don't give ourselves the opportunity to step out of that in a way that is healthy. So we stay locked in sort of a, what's the word I'm looking for? We stay locked into a pattern of consciousness and thought forms and of observational consciousness that doesn't actually serve us. So I started noticing this in myself when I was in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was working on myself a lot. And I was going through my resentments, and I was looking at all the ways that I'd screwed up my life with alcohol. And I didn't really know how to put my finger on it in terms of the narcissistic aspect of this behavior. But what I did notice is my self-focus, right? I noticed that I took everything personally, and I didn't really account for other people's responses to me or reactions to me. Everything was happening to me, and that's in the victim consciousness field. So, once you start taking responsibility for your behavior and your actions and the ways that these things show up in your life, you start to see a pattern. You can start to see a pattern where these things aren't actually serving you. And so one of the things that is really obvious about narcissistic behavior is when someone is self-centered, not self-oriented and not self-central, which would be more of a self-care aspect of reality, right? It's more when people are self-centered and they don't look outside of themselves for to see what the response. Hi, Kenzo. I was thinking about you this morning. I forgot to give you the deer antlers, so we'll talk about that. The recognizing when we are affecting others is a big part of stepping out of narcissism. So let's say we have a reaction to something or someone and their behavior. We usually, if we're reacting to something, yes, next time. If we're reacting to something, it's because we're coming from a narcissistic, self-centered viewpoint. We may get defensive with that other person. We may have all these different reactions to them because we have this idea in our minds that something's being done to us. When in actuality, it may be that we shouldn't be taking it personally because this person is coming from their lenses and their focus of where they're coming from, and their lenses might also be self-centered, right? They might also be victim consciousness, and they might also be taking things personally, which are actually not personal, right, to them. But then they project onto the other person or onto you, and then you take it personally. And so then it's like popcorn. It's like pop, 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 right? And then it never stops the cycle. So in order to stop that cycle, we have to be willing to step out of our own reactive behavior and actually observe where that other person is coming from, and be able to be like, oh, okay, maybe that's actually not related to me, and maybe I don't need to react to that. Maybe I need to take a step back, shift into unconditional love, and hold that place in my heart for this person to, come around. And maybe I can help them if I'm in my own right. If I'm in right relations with myself, then it's easier for me to support someone else in coming into right relations within themselves, right? But if I'm acting from a narcissistic reactional framework, that's not going to be possible because I can't see outside of myself. So really, what I consider narcissistic is when someone is totally self-focused and they can't actually, and they may be a very giving person, very heart-centered. We are heart-centered people, but sometimes we step into our head and we disconnect our head from our heart. And that's when we get in trouble, because then our thought forms are like spinning and we're like reacting to something, when in fact, all we need to do is drop back into our hearts, right? So that we go back into that vertical alignment. And then we're not looking outside of ourselves for these answers from others, and we're not looking to validate ourselves through horizontal harvesting, right? So what happens with narcissistic behavior is that they're usually, or we are usually responding from a place of needing to feed ourselves horizontally outside of ourselves rather than looking for it within ourselves. So when we start to take personal responsibility for our own behavior, our own narcissistic qualities, and our own signs of narcissism within ourselves, what we learn is that, one, it's totally curable. Narcissists will not always be narcissists. We can step out of our own narcissism. So if we can do it, anybody can do it. If I can step out of my own narcissistic qualities and become a more heart-centered person and become more of service to the collective and to humanity at large, then of course, hi, Angela, then of course, anybody can, right? And so hi, babe, I want to, she's like, spank it, preach it. So that's what I really want to speak to, is how do we recognize within ourselves these pieces, these signs of narcissism that show up in our lives, right? That we aren't paying attention to. It's an unconscious behavior, or we see that it's affecting other people, but we don't really know how to stop it, right? And that's a big piece, is we don't know how to stop our narcissistic behavior. So how do we step out of that pattern? How do we step out of our narcissism and into our heart so that we can be fully present and available for our experience without affecting someone negatively, or without seeming narcissistic, or without reacting to life, right? Because narcissism to me is more of a reaction out of a place of insecurity and self-esteem and patterns of behavior and habits, really, that are formed through conditioning from childhood or from other ways that it shows up. But society breeds narcissism now. I mean, it literally breeds narcissism. So for me, I needed to be willing to look at how I was affecting other people, because that's where I started to see the patterns. is in my reactions to others, even if they're being narcissistic or even if they're being, not very nice, right? It was really my choice at the end of the day, whether or not I was willing to react or whether or not I was willing to not react, right? And to be willing to look at the more subtle layers of what was really going on and be able to do something about it. So for me, it was causing me a lot of suffering to continue to react to other people, and I really wanted to change that within myself. I didn't want to react anymore. I didn't want to be like in this like negative pattern loop of, being in connection with people and them projecting onto me something that usually wasn't true. But then me, because I would react out of a negative, because I would react out of my head rather than my heart, and I was disconnected, it didn't give me the opportunity to step back and to drop in and be like, okay, wait a minute. Where is this person actually coming from? What is their lens? Like, what are they actually thinking right now? What are they seeing that's causing this reaction in them? And so I started to observe. I started to step back and just be more quiet and start listening to what people were saying and to observe them in their life, in their daily life, in their patterns of behavior, and to look at what was really going on in their environment, starting to see them in their environment and what was causing them to react that way or to respond that way. And so in order to do this, though, we have to be willing to look at ourselves, right? If we don't look at ourselves, we're never going to see what someone else is doing, right? So it took for me to look at myself first, and then I was able to see it in other people, right? And then I was willing to step back and to not react and to do something about it, right? And then I'm able to help other people because then I can drop into love, into my heart, and be able to then come from a place of love in communicating with that other person and being able to have an interpersonal dialogue rather than a selfish dialogue and a selfless dialogue where someone's a victim and someone's a perpetrator, right? So when you come into interpersonal relations, it's like two people actually interacting, right? Rather than reacting. So interpersonal dynamics are different than codependent dynamics. So codependent dynamics would be something like, I am giving you something or I'm saying something to you in expectation of your response and in expectation of getting my needs met through this agenda that I have in terms of what I'm offering out and giving, right? Whatever it is, like, so I'm trying to break it down so it makes sense. So let's say somebody is like, hey, I want to take you to this ball game, but in fact, that person's like, hey, I want to get laid, and this is my way of, coming around to getting you to sleep with me. You know what I mean? So, and what if I'm not even attracted to that person and they're trying to get me to sleep with them, but they have no idea who I am as a person and they're just literally one-track mind, And that's kind of a codependent behavior. That's a behavior that it has an agenda that wants something back from that other person. Whereas an interpersonal dynamic and a conversation, right, would be like, hey, how would you feel about going to this thing with me? Like, I would love for you to come with me and I'd love to have your company. And honoring that person and respecting them in who they are as a sovereign being on this planet. And then, hey, if there's a connection or a chemistry, cool, but there's no expectation of that. So then the interpersonal relations, and when you start talking to people, so for example, another thing would be like blame and projection, okay? So one person is like, you're doing this, blah, 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 but they're not willing at all to see. This is a very narcissistic thing, actually. They will project onto the other person and they won't actually see what they're doing to perpetrate the dynamic, the dysfunctional dynamic that's playing itself out in the relationship. So in nonviolent communication, one of the things that is super core to nonviolent communication is that we all have universal core needs that need to be met, like a roof over our head, food in our belly, you know, things, basic needs. But then we also have core emotional needs that need to be met and core like physical needs that need to be met. There's all these different types of needs that people have that need to be met. So when you're talking to somebody in nonviolent communication, rather than projecting onto them, so let's say you're triggered, right? And you get triggered by someone because they're projecting something onto you and they're making you feel bad about something, and you're like triggered, one, because you feel disrespected, two, because your needs are not being taken into consideration, and three, because you're being accused of something without there actually being a reason behind what they're saying, right? So sometimes they're justified in their reasoning as to why they would be, you know, projecting onto you this idea, right? But remember, if we take a step back and we look, it may be that they're coming from the lenses where they can't actually see what's going on in terms of their own behavior and how they are perpetuating this dynamic within the relationship. Right? So when that happens, what do? Do we react? Do we be like, rah! Or do we actually step back, take a moment, and be like, okay, wait a minute. Is this person actually triggered by something that my behavior did? Like, did I actually do something? Let's start there. Like, did I actually hurt this person? What did I do that caused this reaction? So taking personal responsibility first and foremost, like, how am I showing up right now? How am I creating this dynamic? Personal responsibility, source alignment, rather than horizontal harvesting and reacting and saying, how dare that person talk to me that way? Be like, hold on a minute. Actually, I did say something that was disrespectful. So, taking full responsibility, I apologize. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. How can I support you in this moment to help you feel more safe? How can I support you in this moment to help you feel like, you know, your needs are getting met and being taken into consideration, right? That's one form of nonviolent communication. And also then, in nonviolent communication, when we want to express how we're triggered to this other person and communicate how we're feeling when we're triggered, one, for me, I always wait until I'm calm again. And I can come from a heart-centered place. And I've processed out my own shit, excuse my French, but I've processed out my own stuff so that I'm not projecting onto the other person as much as humanly possible. So if it's happening in the moment and you're like, rah! Right? I will just be like, I love you. I don't want to fight. And just really dropping into this place of love. Because at the end of the day, the love is ever present. And the love is the core of any relationship that you have, right? If you want to have love-centered, heart-centered relationships, it's crucial that you are willing to drop into love in those moments where you may be being narcissistic or someone else may be being narcissistic, right? So then from that place, you can shift it, and that sometimes, okay, so sometimes that person will be like, rah! And then when you do that, they go, and they realize that something's happening, that they realize that they're in this thing, right? But if somebody keeps going and they're abusive or something of that nature, walking away, definitely, right? But if I have hurt someone else, like, so let's say I say something that's insensitive to someone else, and I don't realize that what I've done is insensitive, and I'm coming from my narcissistic personality, from my egoic self, and from my place of reaction, I'm not in my heart, right? I'm reacting rather than dropping into my heart and coming from a love-centered place within this situation and being able to then hold space and be loving towards that other person, right? So if I've done something that's insensitive, I immediately check myself and figure out where, what's happening, where am I reacting from, what's going on with me, how, 222, what's happening with me that I'm reacting? Do I feel like my needs are not being met or being taken into consideration? What am I feeling? Am I feeling disrespected? Am I feeling hurt? Are my feelings hurt? What's really going on? Usually when our feelings get hurt, it's because our inner child is upset or our negative ego, right? Because something that we've done has hurt somebody else and we don't want to take full responsibility for that. And we've acted out of a narcissistic space. So what do? We retract, we go back inward, we take full responsibility for our behavior, and we reset the dynamic. We take responsibility for resetting the dynamic. We don't leave it to the other person, because the other person may still be responding from a narcissistic place and have their feelings hurt and be upset and reactive, and so that's not going to work. Like, they're in their space, and we need to let them calm down, right? So what we can do, though, is we can take full and diffuse the bomb by taking full responsibility for our part in something, right? And that will diffuse that bomb. It should. Because then that other person will see and realize that, oh, this person is actually taking responsibility for their behavior. And so most of the time, if somebody's projecting something onto me and I feel like, even if I feel like I haven't done anything, I will apologize and take full responsibility for whatever I may have done to harm them in any way, shape, or form. Because I personally don't want to be the cause of someone's pain. Not interested. So the reactive thing, the reaction thing, the narcissistic aspect of this is when, okay, so for example, I was saying that the narcissist will accuse someone else of something, right? When in fact, it could be that they're coming from their victim stance, from their place of, this person's doing this to me. That's a narcissist. Victim consciousness is a narcissistic quality, okay? Just like shyness and timidness and reservation and being reserved is also a narcissistic quality. Because when you're in that space, you're not actually free to be who you are. You're not actually free to naturally receive the goodness that is coming to you. So you're actually blocking your positive energy when you're self-focused, and you're constantly filtering everything through your consciousness as how you're receiving it and how it's treating you, or how it's coming to you, right? You can't see outside of yourself to see that other people are in your environment and other people may be reacting to you, and you can't see it because you're too busy thinking about how it's affecting you, right? So this is a key. If you start to observe your thoughts, right, what ends up happening is you start to see how you are responding to things. If you start to step back and observe how you're responding to your environment, you will notice whether or not you are being narcissistic or not. You'll start to recognize those signs pretty quickly, that you're either, one, coming from a victim consciousness, two, you're coming from an ego arrogance consciousness, right? So it can flip back and forth, the arrogant doormat. which is a coined phrase that was in the program of Al-Anon, Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon, that I learned a long time ago. And it really helped me because I started to see how the narcissistic qualities are so rampant in the dysfunctional dynamic within families and society, right? So now it's being bred in our society. Everywhere we look, we're literally dealing with it all the time. And you know, it totally plays into like dating and like meeting people and the masculine and the feminine and how they're interacting with each other, because now everybody's being programmed to that they can get whatever they want. They just go on a dating site and it's like, I can just have anybody I want. And it's just like, you know, we're just flipping through people as if they're on a menu, you know, and it's not healthy because they're human beings. They're actual human beings. And we can't really tell by a photograph. I mean, some of us can if we're really observing and looking and looking at that human, right, through the photograph. But most of us can't actually, by a photograph, tell what's really going on with someone unless we sit back and take the time to look. So it's one thing to recognize how others are treating you that are narcissistic, other people when they are narcissistic, right? But it's another thing to be willing to see our narcissistic qualities and how our consciousness has been influenced by society and by what's happening on the planet right now, right? And a lot of us are experiencing a lot of empathic, you know, dynamics right now. We're feeling a lot of energies, and there's a lot of energy being bombarded into our experience. So it's very difficult for us to show up for ourselves on this level. But it's actually, in my opinion, is the most necessary thing that we could possibly be doing, right? With ourselves, with our life, with our consciousness, is to really pay attention to how it's showing up, to how our thought forms are actually moving through our consciousness, okay? So back to nonviolent communication, where this is super key. So let's say that somebody hurt your feelings and you're really pissed off about it and you've had to process it and you've cried it out and you're coming back around to this place where you're still angry, right? But you want to communicate to this person, but you don't really know how to go about it in a way that would be conducive to reality, to bring it to closure or to have resolve, right? This is what nonviolent communication was established for, is because what it does is it allows you to speak your truth. It allows you to come back around to what's going on with you and to communicate it to this other person to help them understand how to treat you, number one, and number two, what it is that they might have done to create that dynamic in their relationships, right? So in nonviolent communication, there's a way to communicate, a form of communication that is incredibly beautiful. I'm getting full body chills just even talking about it. It is so important. And what it is making I statements, right? So in other words, if you want to share something with someone and you feel hurt or you're angry, once you've processed out the anger enough that you feel like you can come to this person and communicate, if this person is pressuring you to bring closure, you have to stand in your truth and be like, actually, I need to process this out. And once I've come back to a place of love and I'm in my heart, then I would be happy to have a conversation with you, so that you're taking care of yourself. So a lot of people don't do that. They just react again, and then it fuels more of that fire. So a key is to be calm and in your heart when you want to communicate this information to someone else about what's happened and how they're feeling and how you're feeling. And to get some level of closure and resolve, it is important for us to be willing to look at all of those factors. Are we upset? Are we angry? Are we hurt? Like, we need to get back around, come back around to this heart-centered consciousness. So once we do that though, how do we go about communicating with that other person what it is that we need to say in order for our needs to be taken into consideration, for our needs to be met, and for us to really understand what that other person is going through, but also what we are not willing to experience in our experience. And if we want to move forward with that person, how do we do that? Okay. And even if we don't, we can still speak our truth and move forward. So I'm at this place where I don't have a problem speaking my truth, but I do have a problem sometimes speaking with my son. I have a weakness there, and I will be completely transparent about it. And the weakness comes from past stuff, right? So I'm having to now clear out these super deep layers of things that I already had processed out, because now I'm interacting with him on a daily basis and it has a different dynamic. He's getting older and things have changed. So I'm doing my best to adjust to this new interaction that I'm having with this other person, right? And in the process, I'm sucking miserably. I've got to tell you, I totally suck, and I suck at it, and I'm doing the best I can, but it's hard. And it's, you know, I'm considering where that person's coming from, a teenage perspective, you know, all of those things. But I'm not being given the respect that I feel that I deserve. So how do I go about communicating that? First things first, I can't make it about him. I need to make it about myself. But when I do that, he then projects onto me that I'm being selfish, right? Because I'm talking about myself. So when that's happening, when you're in a situation where this other person doesn't have any tools, they don't know what they're dealing with, they don't know how to communicate, it can be very challenging to understand how to communicate your needs to this other person, and to also come into closure and resolve when they're stuck in a pattern of dysfunctional behavior in that loop, right? So for me, I'm still going to use nonviolent communication, because I don't want to fuel any more of that fire. I want to diffuse the bomb, right? So the nonviolent communication way of thinking says, so if you want to communicate when someone's hurt your feelings or something has happened and you become triggered, you're like, okay, when this happens, this is how it affects me, right? And then you say, I feel this, I feel that, or, you know, this is how my body's responding to this. And then you can say, I have a request. Now, here's where it shifts into solution, okay? So in solution, we step into a different form of communication. What happens is you are holding the space for change, you're holding the space for resolution, and you're holding space for awareness to come on board with that other person, so that they become aware and they understand what your needs are. And they have the choice to honor it or not honor it, depending on what they need for themselves. They are not required to honor your request. So that's important to understand too, because what happens is that person, that may not be in their highest good to honor your request, right? And we don't know that. We don't know what they need, and we don't know what's going to make them come into right relations with themselves. So it may be that they can't honor your request because of where they're at and what's going on in their lives. But what you can do for yourself is you can step out of narcissism and into solution and into interpersonal dynamics and interpersonal relations, and you can take care of your own needs and make sure that your own needs are being met through the communication that you're giving and giving to that other person. And two, you also set the precedent and an example for that other person as to what right relations looks like, okay? So, for example, when you said this to me, I became triggered, I felt disrespected, and it really upset me that you would actually feel that way about me. I'm really kind of stunned. And so I feel like my needs were not being taken into consideration when you projected that. And I have a request. Would you be willing to blah, blah, blah? So would you be willing to take a step back and observe before, you know, saying something? Would you take a step back and maybe observe where I'm coming from before you react or before you respond to me? Would you be willing to do that? So you're giving them an opportunity and an option rather than telling them what to do or projecting and pointing your finger at them. Of course, they took an action, so you kind of have to address the action that they took. So that's why you say when you did this or whatever. But it's the way that you go about speaking to it determines usually how they react. So we want to take that into consideration when speaking with a narcissist or speaking, you know, when we're coming from this place. We want to make sure that we're not accusing anyone else of their behavior, but really just helping them understand what your reaction was to that stimulus, so that they can get a reflection back and be able to see what it is that you felt or what it is that you experienced through that dynamic. And then with that understanding, you can give them a solution. And once you give them that solution, then they have a choice, right? They have a choice to step out of their narcissistic behavior and back into their heart. So this is a concept that most people don't even know about. This is a concept and a solution that most people don't have and they don't even know exists. So one of the things that I invite you to do is get the Nonviolent Communication book by Marshall Rosenberg and really dive in, because right now in this time period in history, more and more what I'm receiving and seeing is that interpersonal dynamics are going to get really crazy for a minute, because what's happening is people are waking up. They're starting to see things. They're starting to lose it a little bit. They're not sure what to do. They're not sure how to go about things. They don't have any solutions or tools. And so the Nonviolent Communication book can really help with communication skills and how we go about interacting in our daily environments and with our relationships with others. So having said all that, I'm feeling like that's quite a bit of information for today, and we're going on 37 minutes. Woo! I was only planning on doing 20. So I kept talking. It was really good. If you just started watching, I highly recommend and encourage you to go back and listen to this video. And I'm doing these every day when possible, Live365. Today's day 12. I did one on day 10, which is fun, and that's with my friend Kenzo. So yes, so continuing to just have these conversations, talk about these topics, and to really dive into how can we clear these narcissistic qualities out of our own experience and out of our own behavioral patterns and our own reactions, so that we don't perpetuate it, so that we can diffuse the bomb and drop into solution and drop into a heart-centered consciousness and be able to use our heart-centered consciousness to communicate with others in a healthy way, in a healthy dynamic between each other, and we won't continue to trigger people. Hi, Angeline. We won't continue to trigger people with our reactions, and we can step back, take a look, and respond rather than react to someone. And then we are stepping out of our own narcissism and into a more heart-centered place. So having said that, I bless you on your journey today. Thank you so much for being with me, and I will see you tomorrow. Live65 signing off. Bye. Bye. I'm trying to find the button.